My name is Andrew, and I will be taking us through Scripture, verse by verse, today, and we will finish the book of Ruth. And I will say the central message of this last chapter, this final chapter of Ruth, Ruth chapter 4, is that God redeems his people through a Redeemer who acts with both righteousness and love, turning emptiness into fullness and writing our small stories into his greater story of grace. And before we begin this chapter, or at least in earnest, I need to tell you about redemption. To redeem means to buy back, to reclaim what was lost, or to set free by paying a price. In the Hebrew, the word is ga'al, to redeem, and it refers to the kinsman redeemer, like what we see in Ruth. The kinsman redeemer is the nearest relative who had both the right and the responsibility to rescue a family member in trouble. When it's translated to the Greek means a ransom, or the price paid to release a captive. And I want to say redemption it's more than a transaction. It's like a transformation with that transaction. So a price is paid, and then a person's story is changed. From bondage to freedom, from loss to restoration, from despair to hope. That's the kind of transformation we're talking about in redemption. And in the Old Testament, God gave Israel a picture of a goel. That's the Hebrew word, basically the redeemer in the family. That's what Boaz will be. So if a man became poor and had to sell his land, the redeemer would buy it back. If a man was enslaved, the redeemer would purchase his freedom. If a man died childless, the redeemer could marry the widow and then raise an heir to carry on that name and legacy of the dead relative, to carry on that the name of the family. And that's exactly what Boaz will do in chapter 4. Not because he must, but because he desires, because he loves. And behind every human redeemer stands God himself, who is the true redeemer of Israel. He redeemed his people from slavery in Egypt. He rescued them from exile and oppression. He restored them again and again and again out of sheer covenant love, out of chesed love. Not because they deserved it, but because that's who he is. He's faithful. All of that Old Testament imagery, it points forward to the New Testament reality that Christ Jesus is our ultimate Redeemer. He is our greater Boaz. Humanity's problem is not famine or widowhood. It's slavery to sin and death. By nature, that's where we are. That's what we get. That's what we deserve. In Christ, he came to pay the ransom for our release. The Son of Man said, "I came not to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many." And at the cross, Jesus paid the price with his own blood. He redeemed us from sin's penalty, from sin's power, and one day from sin's very presence. And through him, we're not only forgiven, we're actually restored. We're restored. We gain back the inheritance that we forfeited back in the first Adam. We're brought back into God's family and we're adopted as sons and daughters. So redemption has 3 dimensions, and you could write these down. It's legal in that a debt is paid. It is relational in that a relationship is restored. And it's transformational, a life made new. So legal, relational, transformational. And if you listen carefully, you'll see all 3 in Boaz's actions in this chapter. Boaz, he fulfills the law's requirement, that's the legal side. He takes Ruth as his bride, that's the relational side. And from that union comes a, hashtag spoilers, a child, which is new life, new hope, that's the transformational side. But even more, Boaz gives us a glimpse of Jesus. Boaz was related by blood. Jesus took on flesh. That's the miracle of the incarnation, God becoming man. That's what we celebrate every year at Christmas specifically. That's what we remember. Hebrews 2 says he took on flesh and blood so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death. Jesus became our kin, our relative, so that through him he could be our Redeemer. He didn't redeem us from a distance. He entered into our story. He wore our weakness and then paid our own ransom in his own blood. Boaz, he was able to redeem, but Jesus alone is powerful to save. Boaz, he was willing to redeem, and Jesus loved us and gave himself to us. Boaz's redemption was done publicly, as we will see, at a city gate. And Jesus' redemption was declared to the world in his resurrection. So when we read this beautiful story, we're not just reading some ancient love story, even though it is that. It's a beautiful love story. But we are seeing a preview of the gospel. Redemption is what God does. God is in the business of redemption. Redemption is who God is, and through Christ, he turns emptiness into fullness, brokenness into blessing, and loss into life. In the book of Ruth, I will say this too, to give us a little bit more context. The book of Ruth takes place during the dark days of the judges, when everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And behind all of it, God's providence is at work. God's providence is at work, quietly at work. What looks like coincidence, meaning for Ruth, she just so happened to be in the right field at the right time with the right Redeemer. That coincidence is actually providence. It's covenantal care. Providence means God's hand is always at work, even when his name seems absent. And in Ruth's story, as in ours, God weaves faithfulness through the ordinary so that redemption is never an accident. It's his design. And yet, in that spiritual darkness, God was quietly working redemption through ordinary people, a widowed immigrant, a kind farmer, and an aging mother-in-law. No kings, no prophets, no miracles, just faithfulness, just love, and just providence. And that brings us to chapter 4, where redemption finally steps into the light. So look at this with me. Verse 1 reads this. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the kinsman redeemer of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. So he said, Turn aside, my fellow, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So Boaz, he steps forward to do publicly and legally what he has already done privately, what he has already decided in his heart. That is to redeem Ruth and to restore Naomi's family. Boaz doesn't manipulate things in the dark of night. He brings everything into the light. Redemption isn't some secret affair. It will be public, it's going to be legal, it's going to be righteous. That's what genuine redemption always is. It's grace operating within God's order. And then there, right on cue, comes the closer kinsman, the one who has the first legal right to redeem. The Hebrew text calls him Poloni Alamoni, which basically amounts to Mr. So-and-so. Like it's a Hebrew idiom. It's not that the author forgot this guy's name. It's that the author deliberately withholds it because in a book where every name has meaning, this man's name is left blank. Why? Well, because the man who wants to protect his own inheritance ends up losing even his remembrance. We don't know his name. We don't remember him. He's just so-and-so. The one who refuses to redeem becomes forgettable, but the man who risks everything in love is remembered forever. So here at the gate, we see two kinds of redeemers. One is qualified by blood, but he is not willing. And one who is qualified and willing. One looks at the cost and then pulls back. The other sees the cost and presses forward. One guards his inheritance. The other gives his inheritance to restore someone else's. Sacrifice. And as this exchange unfolds, we see that living picture of the gospel. Because redemption, it always involves a decision. Someone must step forward. Someone has to take responsibility. Someone has to bear the cost and say, I will redeem. Boaz does that for Ruth and Naomi, and in doing so, he shows us the heart of Jesus. Then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they sat down. So in case you forgot or you did not know, the city gate in these times, it was where legal and civic matters were handled. And these 10 elders, they will serve as official witnesses to Naomi's land redemption and to Boaz's marriage to Ruth. And by gathering witnesses, Boaz turns his private devotion into public declaration. Private devotion into public declaration. So the love that Ruth and Boaz shared in secret now becomes a matter of public record and community blessing. This is kind of what we do and show through baptism at this church. A person becomes a Christian at the moment they repent of their sins and place their trust and faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, trusting his death and resurrection for forgiveness and new life. That's becoming a Christian. And those who believe in the gospel, they are baptized as an outward expression of an inward transformation. Private devotion to public declaration. Also, as a service announcement, if you have given your life to Christ but have not been baptized as a confessing believer, let me know. I'd be more than happy to dunk you in the name of the Lord I digress. Also, last time the water was warm, so that was good. Each previous time it was freezing cold. It was freezing cold. And actually last time it was like too hot. It's like 100 degrees. So, but no skin damage, so that's good. Verse 3, then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Mr. So-and-so, what's his name? Hey, guy. He says, Naomi, who has come back from the fields of Moab, has to sell the portion of the field which belonged to our brother Elimelech. So a few things here. In Leviticus chapter 25, verse 23, God said, the land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. That's what God said. The land is mine. So God owned the land, and as per the book of Joshua, we see that each tribe and family is allotted, they receive an allotment of Canaan, or what would be the promised land, Israel. Land was tied to a family's name, and it also was tied to covenant standing. So losing one's land, it meant losing identity and livelihood and basically like a place in God's promise, at least to their minds. So the moment Boaz says Naomi is selling her land or selling the land, every ancient Israelite listener would feel the weight of that tragedy. Like it's not just an economic tragedy. It's not an economic sale. It's the slow extinction of a family name. So from this, we can infer, I will infer, that Elimelech, Naomi's late husband, likely mortgaged or forfeited the land before he traveled to Moab. So when Naomi returns these many years later, the land is still technically Elimelech's family property, but it's in the hands of another, and it cannot be worked or redeemed without payment. And with Elimelech and the two sons Mahlon and Chilion all dead, Naomi has the right of possession, but not the ability of redemption. Thus, she must sell her interest or transfer redemption rights to a kinsman who could restore it legally and economically. So, Naomi, she's not selling a piece of property like a modern homeowner. She's selling the right to redeem or repurchase her late husband's ancestral land so that it stays within the family. Does that make sense? I tried to lay it out as clearly as possible. And if not, oh, sorry. So, I thought to uncover this matter in your hearing, saying, acquire it before those who are sitting here and before the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if no one redeems it, tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am after you. And he said, Mr. So-and-so said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, on the day you acquire the field, this is Boaz using his wisdom. He's crafty as a serpent, innocent as a dove here. Hey, there's this land. If you want it, it's yours. And the guy's like, yeah, I'll take it. And then Boaz like, but there's something else. On the day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the one who had died, in order to raise up the name of the one who had died on behalf of his inheritance. So let me give you the economic logic here. The buyer or the redeemer, he would pay off any existing mortgage or claim on the land. Then the buyer would then assume responsibility to provide for Naomi, and ideally produce an heir through Ruth who would inherit that property. And then in return, the Redeemer would enjoy the use of the land until that heir came of age. So, the kinsman redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. This Mr. So-and-so, this unnamed redeemer, he is lawful but loveless. He follows the letter of the law, but he refuses the spirit of covenant faithfulness. So he represents a person who knows the law of redemption, but lacks the heart of a redeemer. He's not evil, he's just self-protective. He's the kind of person who says, I'll help as long as it doesn't cost me anything. He's willing to redeem the land, but not the life that is attached to the land. He'll pay a price if it benefits him, but not if it blesses someone else. And that distinction it's central to the theology of this chapter in Ruth. Redemption that stops at convenience isn't redemption at all. And this is what the law cannot do. This is what the law can't do. It can diagnose the problem, but it cannot cure it. So the law is like a perfect mirror that shows us everything that's wrong with us, but it cannot clean us. We can't wipe our face on the mirror and get clean. The law reveals our debt, but it does not pay our debt. And Boaz steps in with willing love, and in that moment, grace triumphs over law, just as it would at the cross. Law shows the debt, but grace pays it. So this Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Nobody, represents what the law could not do. The law could point out the problem, which is the loss of inheritance, but it could not redeem it. It could declare the cost, but not pay for it. It could preserve justice, but not produce grace. Boaz, on the other hand, he obviously foreshadows Christ. Christ is called the greater Boaz in early Christian circles. He foreshadows Christ, who saw the cost and then paid it anyway. This is what 1 Peter 1:18 and 19 says. You were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your futile conduct inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood as of a lamb, unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ. The law could never redeem us because redemption requires willing love, and that's something only grace can do. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning the right of redemption and the exchange of land to establish in any manner. A man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So basically, taking off a sandal was a symbolic act used to confirm a legal transaction. It's kind of like the signature. And this is because land, let me back up. The reason for the sandal, why the sandal? Because the land, it was connected to walking. Ownership, it was demonstrated by treading along the land itself, along the ground. So removing a sandal and handing it to another person, it symbolized the transfer of one's right to walk on the claim, to walk or to claim that property. Does that make sense? Pretty clear. So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Acquire this for yourself," and he removed his sandal. So that's basically the gavel falls. That's it. Then Boaz said to the elders of all the people, "You are witnesses today that I have acquired all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon from the hand of Naomi. And also, bonus, cherry on the top, frosting on the cake, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife in order to raise up the name of the one who had died on behalf of his inheritance, so that the name of the one who had died will not be cut off from his brothers or from the gate of his birthplace. You are witnesses today." So here are the three dimensions of redemption that I spoke of previously. To refresh, Boaz fulfills every legal requirement. The price is paid, the witnesses are present, and the covenant is confirmed. And in theological terms, this right here, it's a picture of justification. Justification. The debt is settled, the record is cleared, and Ruth stands in a new legal position. She has a new legal position. In Christ, God declares sinners righteous. When we become Christians, we become righteous, not because what we've done, but because our Redeemer, Jesus, has satisfied every demand of the law on our behalf. There's no loopholes left. Redemption is finished. This mirrors the cross where Jesus declared, "It is finished." The debt paid, justice perfectly satisfied. That's the legal part. The relational part is that Ruth becomes his bride. Sweet. The language of I have acquired her to be my wife, that's the language of covenant love. Chesed. Chesed. That word, it's one of the richest in the Old Testament. It means steadfast, loyal, covenantal love. We see that time and time again throughout our time in 1 and 2 Samuel. Ruth showed this chesed to Naomi when she said, "Where you go, I'll go." Boaz shows it to Ruth at the gate, and behind them both is God, whose chesed endures forever. Redemption is love that keeps his promise, even when it bleeds. Redemption brings relationship. Ruth isn't a servant rescued from debt. She is a bride brought into covenant. This is a picture of Christ and his church. We're not redeemed to be employees of God, but rather beloved children and the bride of Christ. That's the relational part. And then the transformational part. That part is that legacy was restored. Boaz redeems the name of the dead. That is Mahlon and Elimelech. So their family line, once extinguished, once dead, is now revived. And Naomi's story, once marked by emptiness, will now end in fullness. Redemption, it reverses death's verdict and then transforms despair into legacy. And all the people who were in the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May Yahweh grant the woman who is coming into your home to be like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. And so you shall achieve excellence in Ephrathah, and shall proclaim your name in Bethlehem. For those uninitiated, Rachel and Leah were the wives of Jacob, who was later given the name Israel. They were the mothers of the 12 tribes. And together they literally built the house of Israel. And this blessing, it implicitly asks God to do again what he did for Rachel. For those of us that forgot, Rachel, she was barren, and God turned a barrenness into fruitfulness. God opened her womb. And likewise, Ruth, she seemingly was also barren. She was married for 10-ish years, no child. So the people bless Ruth, asking God to do again what he has done so many times before, to bring life out of barrenness, hope out of emptiness, and a future out of faith. Verse 12, moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the seed which Yahweh will grant you by this young woman. So these onlookers, they bring up Perez, Tamar, and Judah. Perez's line is the line of Judah from which the kings of Israel would eventually descend, namely David and Solomon, and then some guy named Jesus. But by mentioning him, the elders are unknowingly praying a royal blessing over Boaz and Ruth's house. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And Yahweh granted her conception, and she gave birth to a son. Apart from God, we cannot create life. Physically, spiritually, and eternally. But with God, even the empty womb, the empty heart, and the empty grave can be filled. If God can bring life out of barrenness, he can bring salvation out of death. The ultimate act of divine fruitfulness is the resurrection. So when God brought life out of the tomb, just as he brought life out of every barren womb. Verse 14, then the women said to Naomi, blessed is Yahweh, who has not left you without a kinsman redeemer today, and may his name be proclaimed in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of your soul and a sustainer of your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and put him on her bosom and became his nurse. So Naomi, she once said she came back empty, but now Yahweh has filled her arms and restored her soul. And this child will grow up to carry her family name, but he's more than a baby. He's a sign that God has not forgotten his people. He is a restorer of life, a little resurrection in Naomi's house. And through him, God is pointing forward to another child born in the same town who will be the restorer of all life. And also, don't miss what they say about Ruth. That part, she's better to you than 7 sons. So in a culture that measured blessing by sons, the women of Bethlehem said that one faithful, loving daughter-in-law is worth more than what would be considered perfection. 7 sons, that's the chef's kiss. And that's redemption. That's when love outweighs the loss. when grace writes a new ending and when God turns emptiness into joy. Remember Naomi in chapter 1? She's bitter, broken, convinced that God was against her. Now she's holding the child of redemption in her arms. The same woman who said, "Call me Mara, call me bitter old hag." She's now called blessed. God didn't change her circumstances. He revived her soul, gave her new life. And the whole community joins in her joy too, because redemption, it's never private. It overflows and it pulls others into the song that it sings. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. I think that guy's important. I think we spent like a year and a half studying that guy through Samuel. So in most biblical narratives, parents name the child. But this is odd. The community takes part in the naming here. So Obed means servant or one who serves. So the community names him servant because service has been the heartbeat of redemption through this story. Ruth served Naomi, Boaz served Ruth, and Obed will serve Naomi, and one day from this line will come what Isaiah 53 calls the servant of Yahweh. That's Jesus. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, and Hezron became the father of Ram, and Ram became the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab became the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon became the father of Salma, and Salmon became the father of Boaz, and Boaz became the father of Obed. Actually, I should pause right there. Now, we see that Salma and Salmon, probably the same guy, a weird different naming convention there, but it goes from Salmon straight to Boaz. We know, we are almost positive that this Salmon is the same one that married Rahab during the conquest of Canaan. But if we add up the numbers, it is extremely unlikely that Salmon and Rahab are a direct descendant of Boaz. The only way to stretch it would make everyone super long-lived. Like Boaz would basically have to be like 106 years old here. Possibly, but it is most likely that Salmon, he is the important ancestor, and then patrilineally, meaning son, maybe one or two, and then it goes Boaz. So there's most likely a generational skip there. Doesn't take anything away from the story, but it explains more of the timeline, because there's several hundred years between this and the conquest of Joshua. And it also, in my opinion, shows why Boaz might act the way he acts. Why does Boaz show such care and concern for a foreigner, a woman of ill repute, of a bad name? Well, if grandma or great-grandma was Rahab, whose profession was sultry, to say the least, perhaps he heard the stories of the redemption of Rahab, and those stories went from grandma to mom and then to Boaz. Boaz, this is how you treat a woman. This is what redemption truly is. That's my interpretation of things. And we'll finish with this. And Obed became the father of Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. Also a sidebar. In our Christian English Bibles, the book of Ruth comes after Judges because chronologically it kind of fits, even though Ruth would come somewhere probably in the middle of Judges. And then right after Ruth comes Samuel, so on and so forth. But in the Jewish order, in the Hebrew order of the Old Testament, Proverbs is right before Ruth. So if you read Proverbs 31, which describes an excellent wife, and then it goes straight into the book of Ruth, which describes an excellent wife. Just a little note. But this whole genealogy here, this is the Bible's way of saying, look how far grace reaches. The genealogy is proof that God's providence is not random. What seemed like small, everyday acts of kindness, Ruth gleaning, Boaz noticing, Naomi advising, they were all actually threads in the tapestry of redemption. And it's through that ordinary obedience. In our life, most of us will not see miracles, God defying the nature that he created. But we all experience the unseen miracles of providence. It's God's sneaky hand orchestrating events to his greater good. While Ruth and Boaz were simply walking in faithfulness, God was building a dynasty. And this genealogy is the bridge from Ruth to David and David to Jesus. The same God who wrote Naomi's redemption wrote our redemption. Boaz redeemed Ruth, Christ redeemed us. Obed restored one family, and Jesus restored the family of God. And the story that began with famine, it ends with a king. He's the true bread of life that is born in Bethlehem. And maybe that's where the story meets us today. So let me give some examples. For the Christian who feels empty, this tells us that God, he's not finished with your story. He still writes endings that overflow with grace. Maybe to the self-protective Christian, just like Mr. Nobody, don't be that nameless redeemer who counts the cost and then walks away. Be like Boaz, who his love pays the price. And then maybe to the outsider, someone who does not know Jesus, the Ruth that is in the room. There is room for you in God's family. The Redeemer, he delights to call you his own. He delights it. And then for the weary Christian, Christ is the restorer of life. He's the one who nourishes your soul. He's the Redeemer who sustains you until glory. And it's a reminder that redemption doesn't change. It doesn't just change one moment. It changes generations. Ruth's story ends with a genealogy. It's a list of names, ordinary people, but extraordinary grace. Perez, Hezron, Ram, Abinadab, Jesus. That's a pretty good lineage. From famine to fullness, from life to death, from bitterness to blessing, that is the path of redemption. The same God who wrote Ruth's ending, he's still writing mine. He is still writing yours. And through the greater Boaz, Jesus Christ, every story that begins in loss can end in life. And one day, one day that redemption will be complete. The same Jesus who redeemed us by his blood will return to redeem creation itself. Right now in our lives, we're at the beginning of Ruth chapter 4. Boaz has already redeemed in his heart, but it's not complete yet. And we are just waiting to the day when faith becomes sight, when Christ finally comes, restores all things, calls us home. Every broken thing will be made whole. Every loss will be reversed, and every tear wiped away. The Redeemer who came to Bethlehem, he will come again in glory, and his story will be the final word on our story. So come to him, not because you earned redemption, but because he has already paid it. The greater Boaz, he still welcomes anyone willing to rest at his feet. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever.